Hello, welcome back to Woke Nation. Another episode going on down here. I think it's episode 57 or something like that. But I titled this episode, Is God Blessing America? And this is something I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time because every time I hear that song, God bless America. I know I sound like a goat being strangled, but or at the end of any presidential speech, at the end of the State of the Union, or any speech that any politician gives, it's always kind of amusing to me to hear them say, and God bless America. And it's really made me start to think, well, what does that even really mean? Does anybody that says it really know what it means either? Does even President Trump have any concept whatsoever over what it might mean, God bless America? Um, it, we could all sit around and debate, what does everybody mean by this concept of God, and what does it mean to bless? Obviously the idea being, because of our Christian heritage, our Judeo-Christian roots, that the left, I know I hate the term left, but the more progressive liberal faction in America is so desperately trying to deny. And actually, incidentally, David Horowitz just wrote a really great book about how the left is trying to eradicate Christianity from America right now. I recommend everybody pick it up. I've skimmed through it. I haven't read the whole thing, but it seems like it's a really good book. I think that's anyway. It really got me started thinking. Okay, so we have this concept of God, that obviously is tied to our Christian heritage. America was founded as a quote unquote Christian nation. Now there's a lot of secularists and atheists alive today who would challenge that idea that we were ever a Christian nation. Just very briefly, I'm not going to go into it too deeply, but I think this concept of the separation of church and state has been really misunderstood in today's time. A lot of humanists and secularists use it as this broad sweeping idea to where the church should have no influence whatsoever over what goes on in our government, and that any political leaders should divorce their political practice and their lawmaking and the way they vote from their faith. So, in other words, they should leave their vote leave their faith at home and ignore it as long as they're within the halls of Congress. This is kind of the idea that secularists and humanists and atheists, which are all one and the same, materialists, naturalists, whatever, blah, 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 this is what they kind of they read into this idea of the separation of church and state. I haven't studied the issue in any huge detail, but what I have read about it, and from listening to other people talk about it, some conservative speakers, I've come to the conclusion, I think, that this has been woefully misunderstood. In no way were the founding fathers suggesting that the politicians that have been elected into office to represent the people should leave their faith at home. Let's not forget that the majority of the people in America, even today, claim to be Christian. So if you're going to elect people to represent us, it would logically follow that they would represent Christian values. So how do you leave your Christian faith at home that is wound up in these values, that is tied inextricably to these values, when then you go to make laws? Or to vote on laws which influence people and the way they live? Law is inevitably tied to morality. And if we are a Christian nation, then it is inevitably going to be tied to Christian morality. This is also, like I said, these men are representing the people. If the people claim to be Christian, then the men themselves and the women who represent them must represent Christian values. So this divorce that they're trying to pull off here between your faith and the law is absolutely ridiculous. The two cannot be divided. They cannot be divorced. Okay? Your faith and your values also dictate your conscience, really. And you can't just silence your conscience when you go to vote on an important bill, especially the issues that are going on today, like the chaos at the border. These are very deep issues: abortion, the gay marriage, all these kinds of things. No matter what side of the fence you sit on, you cannot divorce the root of your morality from how you vote. You just can't. You can't leave your faith at home. This is absurd. Also, I don't hear anyone telling Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar to leave their Muslim faith at home when they go into the halls of Congress. Nobody's telling them to do that. So to tell a Christian to go and do the same thing is absurd and hypocritical, to say the least. And some of these members of Congress have been called out on this repeatedly now. The representative from Alaska, who's now running for president, what's her name? Tulsi Gabbard, called out Mauricio Hono and I think Nancy Pelosi and Rashida Tlaib and some others for trying to tell, and the name escapes me right now. There was I believe a Democrat congressman that was running for office, and he was a Roman Catholic. And because of his Catholic faith, they were telling him that he was not fit for office, and I think it was Hono, who made the infamous comment that the dogma lives loudly in you. And Tulsi Gabbard rightly told them that what they were exhibiting was bigotry. Because again, nobody's telling Ilhan Omar to leave her faith at home. It's only Christians that should separate their faith from the state. But going back to that, if you actually read what the founding fathers had to say about Christianity and our government, particularly like John Adams, who was president during the signing of the Treaty of Tripoli, if I pronounce that correctly. If not, I apologize. That many secularists will point to this particular treaty. I think it was in 1789, I believe. Stated that the United States, basically in a word, I'm paraphrasing, is not a Christian nation. And a lot of secularists will point to that and say, yeah, there, you see. Now, of course, they never really read the rest of the treaty, and they never make any effort to read the comments made by the envoy. I think his last name was Barlow, John Barlow, I believe. I don't have his name in front of me, and John Adams, who was president during the signing of the treaty. They, of course, never go and read their comments and their quotes and their entries and in their journals and in newspapers and in public documents that they made as to why that treaty was signed and what it actually meant. They were in no way saying that America was not a Christian nation, when instead they were pointing to, with the separation of the church and state, you have to understand our nation's history. We had a lot of our founding original citizens that came over here on Plymouth Rock from England were pilgrims fleeing religious persecution from England, and they came over because there was the state church in England, the Anglican Church, and it was persecuting Puritans. And so the Puritans fled over to America to escape persecution. They were the Pilgrims also. And that's what really brought about this whole idea of separating church and state, so that there wouldn't be a state church, and that they really wanted to separate those two powers from each other. Not only, and this is very important, for the benefit of the state, so that it would not be used as a religious weapon, but also that the state could not corrupt the church. And what the Treaty of Tripoli and a lot of the ideas behind the separation of church and state actually were speaking to was not totally throwing religion out from state function or as a moral compass, but instead it was to keep denominations, to reduce infighting between denominations, so that denominations like the Episcopalians, the Pentecostals, the Presbyterians, the Baptists, the Catholics, the Anglicans, the Puritans, that's not really a denomination, but you get the idea, the Quakers, whatever, so that all these different denominations could not war with each other and try to take power. You can't forget that at the signing of the Declaration and the Constitution, when all this stuff was put together, by and large, we were a Christian nation. And if you read the Founding Fathers' words, their actual words and testimony, from their diary entries, from their letters to each other, even people like Benjamin Franklin, who was a deist, and Thomas Jefferson, who was more influenced by the Enlightenment than he was by Christianity, sort of a marriage between the Enlightenment and Christianity, much like Thomas Paine. Most of what they never conceived of a time when America would not be a Christian nation. The entire mode of government, this experiment of government that we have in this country, is built off of Christianity, with Christianity always in mind. This one quote has been attributed to so many different people that I don't even attribute it to anybody when I say it anymore, but it goes like this: America is great because it is good. If it ceases to be good, so also will it cease to be great. That, in a nutshell, pretty much puts in a nutshell what the Founding Fathers believed. It was not this separation of church and state in the sense that Christian morality would not inform matters of the state, but rather they viewed it as a separation to keep each one of them from corrupting each other in the sense of power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you wed the two of them together, that lends itself to the temptation for corruption, obviously. But they never envisioned a time when Christianity would not be the moral foundation of the country. Okay? We just have to start with that first and foremost. So when we get to God bless America, the whole concept of God that we're supposed to be talking about, even in this pluralistic society where we're tolerant of every idea and belief and system, this concept of God is the Christian biblical God. This is undeniable. It's a historical fact. And so my question is, can we really say that anymore? God bless America, when right now, at least in the broad sense of everything, in America, we are not really a Christian nation. Now, there are many people that will quibble with me over that because of statistics and yada, 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 this poll and that poll that say 70% of Americans believe in God. Rubbish. 70% of Americans have no concept of who God is. If you want to know who God is, then you have to actually crack open the Bible and actually study the attributes of God. The attributes are what makes up the being known as God. And nobody takes the time to do that anymore. Nobody fears God, not in the sense of terror, but in the sense of holy respect for an omnipotent, omniscient, all-powerful being that is perfectly holy and perfectly just. We have totally lost any concept of that in America today. Where do you see a fear of God in the land? And again, I'm not speaking of outright terror. Let's go hide under the bed because there's God out there. No. Although in a sense we all should be because of how sinful we are. But let's just be honest. There is no Jordan Peterson, when he gets asked the question of whether do you believe in God, his answer is always this, and I've heard him say it numerous times, so it sounds like it's pretty standard for him. What he says is, what do you mean by believe? Basically, when it comes down to it, how you live is what you believe. And so the question would be better framed, do I live as if God exists? And he would say, yes. Okay. So the answer in short form, yes, he believes God exists. Looking over America today, I would say that most people cannot answer yes to that question. If you reframe the question in America today, do you live as if God exists? Even in a country where 70% of the people, or whatever it is, the 3/4 of the population or the majority believe, quote unquote, that God exists, I would say almost all of them that would say yes to that question do not live as if God exists. To live as if God exists is to live in acknowledgement that he is a superior being, that he is perfect in justice and holiness and righteousness, and we are not. And that instantly begs the question of what can we do? Does he expect anything of us? Oh, he's holy. We're not. So what does this mean for us? What can we do about that? Nobody's asking those questions today. And if you do ask those questions, you're told you're intolerant. Um, so, I mean, when we come down, God bless America, and the whole country proclaims it. It's turned into an empty slogan, an empty, worthless refrain that means next to nothing, and it's almost a mockery to God, because if you're saying that God exists, again, it would behoove all of us to go and actually study what that would actually mean. Who is God? What does it mean that he's God? Did he create everything? Well, because he's God, he must necessarily have done so, which means he's the creator, we're the created. Does he have any standards that we have to live by? Again, nobody's asking these questions. Nobody's life, on the whole, I'm not talking about everybody. And look, I'll be perfectly honest, as I've said in many podcasts before, and I'm always honest about that, I am guilty as anybody else is of sinning and doing terrible things. And the difference is, and this is not in any way to tout my own horn or toot my own horn or whatever, the difference is I actually care about it. I recognize that there's a God above, and he's holy and I'm not, and he's just, and this is a real problem for me, because if I die tomorrow and I stand before him, I'm doomed on my own. I recognize that, and I don't think most people recognize that today. So this whole God bless America, look, let's just be honest and look back through history. Okay, so what record historically do we have for God's interaction with nations throughout history? As I said, well, you can look in the Bible, his interaction with Israel. He was their king, their direct. It was a theocracy for a time there. Did God bless them when they intentionally turned their back on him, when they ignored his laws and his precepts and his statutes, when he sent the prophets to warn them about their sin and they killed the prophets or drove them into hiding? Did he bless them then? No. I mean, we can, and time again, he did bless them, and they turned their back on him, and then the judgment came. He brought them out of Egypt. He sent Moses, and Moses brought the people out of Egypt, after all the plagues and the judgment on the Egyptians. That, by the way, the Israelites physically saw all of this. They physically saw all of these plagues, these supernatural plagues, culminating in the every firstborn Egyptian being killed by the angel of death. They saw all of this. You would think that would strike some sort of holy terror and provoke worship and awe and trembling for God amongst them. And they go out of Egypt. Pharaoh decides to chase after them again. And Moses, in front of them, by God's power going through him, parts the Red Sea. They cross over, and then the sea swallows up Pharaoh and all his chariots. Again, there's certainly no naturalistic, materialistic, humanist explanation for that. Surely they would know that God did this and have some sort of awe and holy terror and respect and fear and trembling. So then they go to Mount Sinai, and Moses goes up on the mountain. God has called him up there to get the Ten Commandments. And Moses is up there for a little bit longer than the Israelites are comfortable with. And so while he's up there, you would think that, they would bide their time in patience. They just witnessed the Red Sea parting and swallowing up the Egyptians, all these plagues in Egypt, culminating, as I said, with the angel of the Lord, the angel of death coming down and snuffing out the lives of every firstborn male child, I think it was, of the Egyptians. They've seen all this, and it didn't happen all that long ago. It's not like generations ago. No, this was weeks ago. I mean, unless they have a shorter attention span than we do. Anyway, so a couple weeks ago, they saw all this, these miraculous, jaw-dropping events. And Moses goes up there, and they actually see fire, lightning, and they hear peals of thunder from up on Mount Sinai. Something's going on up there, but Moses just isn't coming down. So they can't wait any longer. They've got to worship something. So they build a golden calf, start worshiping that, having orgies, and doing all these insanely wicked things. How do you explain that? How do you rationally explain something like that? So when I hear people say, like, I just, if only God would come out of the sky, then I would believe in him. If only God would do this, or if tomorrow I opened my front door and there God was standing, and there was harps and angels and trumpets and a blaring heavenly host, undeniable, and a golden beam of light encompasses me, and a voice says, I am he, now listen. I've heard people say things like that, then I would believe. You've got to be kidding me. No, you wouldn't. You actually wouldn't. You would probably convince yourself that you had hallucinated. I truly believe that if you really want to understand the depths that people will go to deny God and God's reality, then look no further than the people of Israel throughout the Old Testament, who knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was there, and then turned and went clear the other way. There's multiple examples. King Solomon, the same. God spoke with him. He gave him wisdom as a gift, and then all the riches that you could possibly ever want. Spoke directly to him, man to man, or man to God, I should say. And still, at the end of his life, Solomon was raising idols and temples for pagan gods that he knew didn't exist. And he knew God was there. King Ahab, very same story, spoke directly to God and was never a believer and turned his back on God throughout his reign. Constantly the prophets were coming to warn him, and constantly he was doing the exact opposite. There is no rational way you can explain that and just explain it away as, oh, they forgot, or, there was so much going on and they just didn't understand. No, they fully understood. If you want to understand it, then you have to understand how serious a thing sin is. How it completely cuts off our relationship with God and severs it completely and leaves us totally darkened in our understanding. It's an addiction, a total, absolute corruption of nature, and an addiction. One that on our own, I don't believe for a minute that we can break and get free of. That's the whole purpose of Christ. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So when we hear people running around today and saying, God bless America, but then living as if God does not exist, and living like the devil, like the pagans, willfully, and, I sin too, tragically, horribly, but willfully sinning when they know the truth. There's no way to rationally explain that other than just that's how serious sin is. And to say that God is blessing a nation that has willfully turned their back on him, that calls evil good and good evil. You can go to Romans chapter 1 for this, where it says that God gives the people over to a reprobate mind, and the people exchange natural lusts for unnatural lusts, and they degrade their own bodies, they shame their own bodies. But it says that God turns them over to a darkened, reprobate mind. So in essence, God gives them what they want. And I think of it sometimes as, like when you come home and this analogy is not perfect, and it is in no way, like I'm talking about myself like I'm God. So just recognize that. But like when you come home and your son is like eating ice cream and he's just digging into it, and he knows he's not supposed to be doing that, but he does it anyway. So when you come home, and you've caught him doing this more than once, so finally you just tell him, you know what? I keep telling you that stuff's going to make you sick. You shouldn't be eating it after dinner, blah, blah, blah. So you're going to eat that whole tub of ice cream. And he does, and he gets sick. And it's kind of like, in the same sense, you just rub their face and, this is what you really want. Even though I know, and you should trust me that it's not good for you, then you're just going to do it to its fullest until it makes you sick. Not a perfect analogy, but it's the same concept. God turned them over to a reprobate mind. So I mean, we really need to think about this concept of like, God bless America. I mean, it's a good thought. It's nice to think about. I mean, I wish it were so, but I don't see any evidence of it whatsoever. I mean, you could see, people like to always think about God in these happy, like he's the jolly good guy in the sky, just your best bud and a good friend. And, God is love. That's what everyone says. God is love. God is love. God is love. Yada, yada, yada. Again, that's called not preaching the whole counsel of God. First off, when people tell me God is love, I want to ask them, okay, where do you get such an idea from? Where does it say God is love? And most of the time, what you'll hear is John 3:16. Okay, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever should believe in him would not perish but have eternal life. And it's a lovely verse, yes, okay, but if you're going to quote that verse, okay, that's fine, and it definitely demonstrates God's love, but you're not thinking through the whole verse then. What does it say? It says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Okay, why did he give his only begotten Son? And they don't have an answer. But, well, Jesus had to go and die. Why did Jesus have to die? Okay. Was that a demonstration of God's love? Well, yes, in a way it was. For us, for people that believe in Christ, he was a sacrifice on our behalf, that greater love hath no man than he that laid down his life for his friend. Yes, that is a demonstration of his love. But why did Christ have to die? He had to die if we were to see heaven. Now, was that a demonstration of love? His death, yes, but the fact that he had to die, there's something else going on there that nobody likes to think about and nobody talks about anymore, and that's justice, and that's God's justice and his wrath and his hatred and his wrath on sin. Nobody likes to talk about that anymore. We want to. Everybody's fine with talking about the love of God and bless America and all this. Meanwhile, they spit in his face, deny he exists, but then when you need him there in times of trouble, then all of a sudden he's love and your best buddy. That is not God, okay? And actually, that's just a total insult to the very being that the Bible reveals that he is. So to say, God bless America, and not understand or make any effort to understand who he really is in his justice, in his holiness, in his hatred of sin, and in his what a lot of people also don't understand is that Christ didn't just, he willingly gave his life for us, yes, but there was a necessity there. He had to die to pay the price for our sins because, as the Bible says, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. In other words, that's the only way to pay for sin is with sacrifice. But it was absolutely because God cannot turn his back on sin, because he cannot wink at it, because he cannot laugh at it, because he cannot just, overall you're a good person. Come on in. There's none of that if you read the Bible. And if you say if your response to all this is, well, I don't really believe the Bible, then don't say God bless America, okay? Because unless you're talking about Allah or something else, don't say God bless America. And if you say, well, I believe in God, but I just don't believe in the holy books, then where's your concept of God come from? How do you know God exists? Okay, well, because, I believe there's a God that created the world, but I just don't believe in religion. So what kind of God creates the world, turns his back on you, makes no effort to intervene or do anything? Well, I think he does intervene. Oh, yeah, how do you know that? And they give you this kind of like new age hodgepodge nonsense. what kind of a God would create the world, make no effort whatsoever to intervene on it, but just that would truly be a sort of unjust God, one who creates a world, watches as everything deteriorates and falls apart, and does nothing about it whatsoever, whether to judge or to save. You might as well just be an atheist at that point. Um, and a lot of people get this idea that God is in everything. God is the tree, God is the branch. Then how would he bless you? How does a tree bless you? Or what are you trying to say? Grass bless America? Sky bless America, squirrel bless America. Give me a break. If God is a squirrel and I just ran the squirrel over, then what does that really say about your concept of God? God is in everything? No, God created everything. There is a separation between God and his creation. Romans 1 again talks about this, that they worship the created rather than the creator. There is a natural inclination in all mankind to worship. Because of our sinful nature, we worship other than God. Naturally, we're inclined to worship ourselves or something in place of God. That's why the Ten Commandments say, "Thou shalt not make any graven image," or "Thou shalt not worship any other gods before me." These things are vitally important. God doesn't just ask, please worship me, please obey my commandments. It's a command. And a lot of the times with the gospel, the sacrifice of Christ, a lot of people say it's the free gift. Well, yes, that is true. But it's not just, they talk about the free offer of the gospel and everything. It is an offer, yeah, in a sense. But what it actually is a command. God commands everybody to repent and turn to Christ. You can't be judged and sent to hell for eternity for turning down an offer. Or for turning down a kind gift, just given as an offer, take it or leave it, nobody goes to hell for that. Nobody is judged for that. You will be judged if you break a commandment, a direct command. You will do this and you do other, then it is just to be punished. But I don't see how it would be just to turn down just an offer, just, you didn't do it? Oh, okay. It just makes no sense to me at all. But when it really comes down to it, I think, we spend a lot of the time just, not paying attention to the things that we actually say. God bless America. These sort of empty statements that we make now without actually thinking through what we're saying. Do we have is there any merit to what we say anymore? Do we understand the connotations or the meaning behind these phrases, or are they just empty slogans now as our culture and our government rapidly deteriorates in front of us? To anyone that says God bless America, I would ask you honestly to show me where this blessing is really displaying itself anymore. Yeah, the economy's doing pretty good. Unemployment's at its lowest, but we're also $25 trillion in debt and climbing. Actually, the worldwide debt is the highest it's ever been. The only thing that's sustaining it is the dollar. If the dollar were to be pulled out of the equation, the entire global economy would collapse. And there's people that are probably thinking out a clever way to pull that off, even as I speak right now. Our government has never been more polarized, and it's on this issue of Christian morality and far more secular and progressive, humanistic utopia, which is socialism. We're totally split down the middle over this. I mean, there's the people talking about civil war even right now. There's the issue of abortion, which is the greatest Holocaust the world has ever seen. God bless America, right? There's still racism. I don't think there's as much of it as some people say, but they're talking about it, and it's certainly dividing the country because a lot of people believe it's still there. The borders, our border is in a total state of disarray. just look at the potential for war around the world with nuclear weapons on a scale that we have never seen before. That if any of these weapons were fired and another country returned fire, you would be talking about hundreds of thousands of millions dead instantaneously. The potential for destruction is unparalleled, and that's not even talking about the technological nightmare that we're walking ourselves into right now. Even as we speak, companies like Google, Facebook, and some of the others. It's not just me saying it, but a lot of people are saying that they have even more power now than governments do. There's people. Peter Thiel just did an interview where he's accusing, and he's one of the top guys in Silicon Valley. The guy's a billionaire. He's in there. He's in like Flynn with the people that are pulling off these mega corporation companies like Google. He knows these people in and out, and he's accusing Google right now of treason, of selling out government secrets and personal citizens' information to China. These companies do not have the interest of the American people at heart, or our American government, but the only thing they have in interest is their own greed and power. The same goes for Facebook. They're not here to benefit us in any way, shape, or form. I mean, come on, people, open your minds. We even if you do any research. Sorry, I just shook the camera. If you do any research just on things like your iPhone, and Facebook selling your data, being able to listen in on personal conversations. People have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that different apps on your phone will actually listen to personal conversations between you and your wife or a loved one or a friend, and then sell that information to advertising companies online. This stuff is not conspiracy theory anymore. And when you have the NSA, the CIA, and you have all this technology on such a grand scale like we've never seen before, where if you look at where it can go, like places like China, where they have the God system in action, where they have their own merit-based system, and cameras watch. I think it's in Shanghai or Beijing, one of those two major cities, where cameras watch absolutely everything that citizens do on a daily basis. And if you commit any kind of sin or infraction that the government believes is wrong, then they penalize you in different forms. You can't travel, you can't buy this, you can't do that, you can't sell, you can't buy the car you wanted to, you can't go and see your parents this weekend. The almighty state taking the place of God really is what it is. And that's rapidly what we're moving into. America is not going to be singing God Bless America. It's going to be singing Uncle Sam Bless America very soon. And have no real love for Uncle Sam as a loving father, but rather as a tyrant, a true tyrant. That's what we're moving towards. If you look, and I'm going to wrap this up here, but if you look at our communities, that's what really, the family and then the community is what should really set off the alarm bells in everyone's, in their minds, your alert system, as to how things are deteriorating. As goes the family, so goes the community, so goes the church, and then so on up through the hierarchies of society. And the family has totally evaporated and deteriorated. Divorce rates are higher than they've ever been. Monogamy is a joke. Any sort of relationships are just being like I said, just a joke, mainly to millennials and now Gen Z. Commitment is something that nobody understands the meaning of. Actually raising a family and supporting them is, why would you do that when you worship self, when self is the ultimate standard, how you feel and what you want, your desires. Sacrifice doesn't enter into the equation at all in that sense. So the family collapses, the church has eroded. The church has totally sold out to the world and manufactured its worship experience as just basically like a rock concert, just another form of entertainment with no concept. If you want to know really what I'm talking about, look to the church services. Are they set up in a way that actually is attempting to worship God as He asks, as He commands to be worshipped in His Word, the Bible, or are they instead set up to intentionally entice people to come in so that they can be entertained and have their felt needs met? And I ask you, which one of those two concepts or realities is the one that would please God? Which is the one that He commands in Scripture? Worshiping as He commands to be worshipped, which is the whole point of corporate worship and corporate gathering together, or entertainment and your felt needs. And as the church sells out, it less and less people believe in it and want anything to do with it, and so it is removed from the center of communities and society, and there's a vacuum left. And what inevitably takes the place of that vacuum, because something has to, is the opportunistic state, and that's where we're at today in America. I could go on, but probably should have put this out kind of around the 4th of July. God bless America. But it's something to think about. Hopefully, it'll get people thinking, just to investigate that. What is this concept of God that we talk about? I think Jordan Peterson puts it perfectly. Do we believe God exists? And what does that mean? What do you mean by believe? It's how you live. Do you live as if He exists? That's the real question. That's what really matters. Your words are meaningless. How do you live? That's what's important. And then you can, if you're living like that and you're living, with the fear of God, then you can start saying things like God bless America. But until we return to living as we should, these are just empty phrases that have absolutely no meaning. But anyway, that's it for this week. Tune in again next week, and I'm not sure what we'll talk about then, but I'm sure I'll figure something out. In the meantime, good night and God be with you.